Well, I think one must bear in mind that Israel denies that it is an occupying power in respect of Gaza. It claims that the occupation has come to an end. In my view, this is absolute nonsense. Israel remains in effective control of Gaza, and so it is still occupied. That means that Israel, under the Geneva Convention of 1949, is obliged not to engage in collective punishment. And clearly the curtailment of the supply of fuel and electricity amounts to collective punishment. There's also the broader obligation under the Geneva Convention and humanitarian law to care for the welfare of the occupied people, and that obligation is also violated. So I don't think there's any question about the illegality of Israel's action in restricting the supply of fuel and electricity.
But Israel, of course, will argue that its actions are in response to what it describes as terrorism, Qassam rockets being fired into Israeli territory. Can these Israeli measures be justified under international law, even if they are retaliatory in nature?
Well, Israel might argue that it is entitled to respond by using force to some of the Qassam rockets, but to punish the whole population is prohibited by international humanitarian law, and that is precisely what is being done. What surprises me is that there has been so little international response to Israel's measures. The international community seems to accept that Israel can really strangle the people of Gaza, provided that they are not denied access to basic foodstuffs. But the situation in Gaza is already very, very serious.
So what pressure can the UN bring to bear, given the reality you describe, on the Israeli government to push it to desist from what you're describing and what many people would describe collective punishment policies?
I'm very heartened by the fact that the Secretary General has strongly condemned the most recent Israeli decision. And I think the United Nations, as an organization acting on its own, is very concerned and able to express its views on the subject. My complaint relates largely to the Quartet, of which the United Nations is a member, because the Quartet, comprising the United States, the United Nations, the Russian Federation and the European Union, is not prepared to condemn Israel strongly for its action. Well, I think the United Nations must take a more active role in the Quartet. I think the United Nations should accept that it is responsible for the protection of human rights in the occupied Palestinian territory, and it must persuade the Quartet to adopt a more vigorous attitude, to be more condemnatory of Israel's actions.
But can that happen? The UN Secretary General is a member of the Quartet. Should he remain a member of the Quartet?
Well, my view is that if the Quartet refuses to take account of the humanitarian situation in the occupied Palestinian territory adequately, that the United Nations should seriously consider its position in the Quartet. And I know I'm not alone in this view.
Now, you recently stated that the Secretary General of the United Nations and his staff seem to be determined to pursue a pro-Israeli line because, and I quote, they're instructed to do so by Washington. This is a serious accusation, is it not?
I don't think I used that language. My position is that it's quite clear that the United States is the dominant member of the Quartet. I think the difficulty is that the United Nations, when it acts on its own, is able to promote and advance the cause of human rights. But when it acts within the Quartet, it has to defer to the dominant power, and that is the United States. I wouldn't say that the Secretary General takes instructions from Washington. It's simply a political reality that the United States is the most powerful member of the Quartet, and its view prevails.
Well, the United States is planning to hold a Middle East conference later this year in Annapolis. And it is quite clear that a key party, Hamas, will not be invited. It's not certain whether Syria would be invited. So is this conference, is this US initiative to be taken seriously at all?
Well, certainly this is a defect in the whole procedure. I think that one has to have regard to the fact that the conference aims to achieve Palestinian self-determination, the creation of a Palestinian state. And it's difficult to see how this can be done if one important political player, Hamas, is not included in the negotiations.
So how important is it that Israel and the United States both engage with Hamas?
I think it's very important that both the United Nations and the United States should engage more actively with Hamas. If one looks at other situations in other parts of the world, the United States and the United Nations have not hesitated to speak to groups that it regards as, quote, terrorist, unquote. I think one has to accept the political reality that Hamas is a force to be reckoned with in the region.